Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about asking questions in English using words like what, where, when, why, how, and who. These words help us learn more about things, places, time, reasons, and people. We use what to ask about things or actions. For example, what do you do every morning? I drink coffee every morning. We use where to ask about places. For example, where does she work? She works at the hospital. We use when to ask about time or frequency. When do you usually go to bed? I usually go to bed at 10 o'clock. We use why to ask about reasons. For example, why do you like studying English? I like studying English because I want to travel. We use how to ask about the way or manner of doing something. For example, how do you go to work? I go to work by bus. We use who to ask about people. For example, who teaches English in your school? Mr. Smith teaches English in my school. Now let's learn about making who questions. They're important in simple present tense. There are two types: subjective, asking about the subject, and objective, asking about the object. Knowing how to ask these help us understand English better and talk more clearly. Subjective who, asking about the subject. Question formation is like so. First, start with who, followed by the verb in the third person singular form, okay, with s, es, and ies. Then include the rest of the sentence. For example, who eats pizza for lunch? As you can see in this question, first we have used the WH question word who for the subject because we're asking about who has done that thing. And then we have used the verb in its base form with s, es, or ies. Or better to put it this way, verbs in their third person singular form. And then comes the rest of the sentence and information you want to provide, okay? And the answer will be the subject. For example, who eats pizza for lunch? Then you say, John eats pizza for lunch. An important point here is that no matter how many people are going to be in the subject, whether it's going to be only one or a couple of people, you always have to use the singular, third person singular form of the verb in the who, subjective who question. So don't ever say, who eat pizza for lunch? No, because the answer might probably be, they eat pizza for lunch, right? No, always use the third person singular form of the verb in your question. So always say, who eats pizza for lunch? Or who does his homework at night? Or who works here? Who takes the garbage out? Who does the dishes? Who plays soccer? You see, always you have to use the third person singular in the subjective who question. Objective who, asking about the object of the sentence, on the other hand, the formation is like so. Begin with whom or who, and use do or does depending on the subject of the sentence, singular or plural, followed by the subject, and then use the base form of the verb without s for present simple, and complete with the rest of the sentence. For example, whom does she help with homework? Or whom does she call every week? You see, in objective who, on the other hand, compared with subjective who, we have to use who or whom. But you can't use whom in the subjective who. You can't say whom eats the pizza, all right? Or don't ever say whom goes out, for example, for a walk. Okay, so always use who or whom for objective, whom for objective, who. Okay, and then use do if the subject that comes after is I, you, we, or they, and does if the subject that's going to be after it is going to be he, she, or it. All right, who do I, or who does he, or does she, and then comes the subjective pronoun or the subject. It can also be a proper noun. For example, who does John, who does Jennifer. And after that, use the base form of the verb. The verb without to, without s, without ing, without anything. So in the question, whom does she call every week? We can say she calls her boss every week. One more note here. In casual conversation, who is often used instead of whom in objective questions, but whom is preferably used in a more formal setting. So remember, for all the WH question words, what, where, why, how, all of them. First, we use the WH question words, as you can see, and then comes the auxiliary verbs do or does, and then the subject comes after the auxiliary verb, and then the base form of the verb will be followed, and then the rest of the question without the information that you are going to ask. Okay, so don't say, for example, where do you go to school every week. You have to remove that school part because you are going to literally ask about that place, right? And that wraps up our lesson on asking questions in English. Remember, asking questions help us learn more and communicate better. Practice using these question words that I taught you today, and soon you will be asking and answering questions like a pro. Thanks for learning with us today, and keep up the great work.